out. Everybody.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Lights Out. I'm your host, Josh, and today we're once again joined by Austin.
Hey, man. What's
Co-host.
up?
How's it going, man?
It's good.
Doing well.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back.
Good. We missed you. Annabelle took your spot last week.
I saw that.
She's very unhappy that we kicked her to the curb yet again. Just, this is not one for her to be a part of, unfortunately.
She's going to have to get used to it, I think.
She really does. She's been giving us a lot of attitude lately. But, you know, we'll bring her back for, you know, the next time we dive into another haunting, which will hopefully be here soon. We got a lot of really interesting stuff coming down the pipe. But also wanted to say what's up to Danny. Completely forgot to bring you into this one. How you doing, man?
What's up, everybody? I hope you're all doing good.
Hopefully you can see him today. We didn't even realize how dark, you know, if you watch the show, how dark his camera is. Like, it did look like you were just kind of floating there, your head.
I always wear black shirts too, so it kind of blends in, and the black hat, so it blends into the background.
Yeah, especially with the black tapestry behind you too. But yeah, we got everything adjusted. We've got a very wild case for you today. This is the case of Clara Schwartz, and this has a little bit of some gaming elements to it.
Yup.
Not video gaming.
Nope. We've seen this before too. Some tabletop RPG and a little bit off the tabletop.
Yeah,
RPG.
taking it a step further.
Yeah, it's like real life RPGing out here.
Table wasn't enough. Let's like make this actually real life, pretty much.
They're going with the LARPing.
So yeah, this is a very interesting case. Clara Schwartz, she, you know, starts this game called Underworld, and she's the Chaos Lord. And there's definitely some, I guess, controversy. Like, did she start this game for the reasons that you do start a game, or did you start it because you had a a plan to take it a whole step further, which is what she ultimately does, and use it as a tool to manipulate those that you bring into this game?
Yeah, pretty diabolical.
Absolutely. I mean, just the way she works the people around her, and the way that she kind of plans this all out is definitely next level. And what happens in this one is shocking and absolutely brutal. So you've been warned. But before we just dive in real quick, I did want to remind everybody, if you love Lights Out, please go subscribe to the show on YouTube. Make sure you're following us on Spotify or subscribe to Apple Podcasts. Wherever you enjoy the show, make sure you just quickly take a second, click that subscribe or follow button. We really do appreciate it. And as always, you can rate and review the shows there as well. We love getting your guys' feedback. We read the comments, we read the reviews, and we take it all very seriously. Like, whether it's good or bad, we're always trying to make things better here. So we do appreciate your feedback. And obviously all the nice things you guys say, and the mean things too.
Yeah, I'll take the
We cry a little bit, but that's all right.
Sometimes I laugh at the mean things.
Sometimes we do have a good laugh or two about it. But let's just go ahead and dive in. This is the story of Clara Jane Schwartz. So Clara Jane Schwartz was born in 1981 to Robert Schwartz and Joan Radius in Loudoun County, Virginia. Clara's father, Robert Schwartz, was a nationally renowned scientist who worked in biometrics and DNA research, which is kind of ironic when we get to the end here. I think just the fact he is such a well-respected, prominent person in DNA research, and what happens to him ultimately just kind of blows your mind a little bit. You're like, wow, out of everybody, you know, this guy who's so heavily invested in a very important field, mind you. I mean, DNA research is probably some of the most important research out there.
Absolutely. Especially in crime,
when it comes
right?
to crime. Exactly. In 1992, he became a founding member of the Virginia Biotechnology Association. For the last 15 years of his life, he worked on DNA sequencing analysis. And as most of us know, DNA profiling revolutionized crime scene investigations in the 1980s. Clara also had an older brother named Jesse and an older sister named Catherine, who went by the name Michelle. Not much is known about Clara's early years, but in her teens, she was known as a good student at Loudoun Valley High School. She was always friendly to school faculty and other students, and she did have a big passion for history, especially the Civil War in the nearby battlefields. She often visited with her high school history club. She also excelled in her advanced placement biology class and enjoyed reading in her free time. Her mother, Joan, sadly died after a long 6-year battle with cancer in January 1997 when Clara was just 16 years old. This was a major turning point in her life, and she became even more moody and rebellious than before. She had been very close to her mother growing up, and Clara's paternal grandfather, Bob Schwartz, later said, quote, "I think it was a rather serious thing for her, and my son worked overtime trying to help her. She certainly had a lot of emotional problems that were fairly apparent." So that kind of tells you a little bit about how her grandfather viewed Clara, and just obviously the other thing to take away from that is Robert Schwartz is working very, very hard. He works long hours. He takes his work home, and doesn't mean he's necessarily a bad father, just maybe not as available to his daughter as he needed to be, or how she felt he needed to be. So,
yeah. And I mean, you could only assume after losing, half the people that were raising your kids all of a sudden and having a teenager at home, that must be pretty rough, having to
it's a big
figure
adjustment
that out, by yourself,
Clara's relationship with her father, Robert, did become strained, especially after her mother died. Robert bought Clara a horse named Cherokee to help with the grief of losing her mother, but it seemed like nothing could help. Her attitude and behavior only got worse. And you could kind of see that as a couple ways. He's generally trying to help her, give her, something to focus on other than the loss she just experienced. But part of me is like, did he try to kind of like buy her love a little bit and like give her different things, thinking maybe something will stick and kind of be a replacement?
Yeah, maybe distract her.
Yeah, like why not go ride horses with her or do something together? I guess from my perspective might be a little bit better, but maybe that's what he thought was best. One of Clara's peers in high school, Matthew Norpole, said that Clara wasn't a loner in high school, despite what people thought of her. She was often heard talking about death, self-harm, and suicide at school. And through the rest of high school, she built up a group, relatively small group, of like-minded friends. Around the time of her mother's death, she became closer with a girl named Catherine Inglis, or Katie, who she had known since middle school, in fact. Katie had a boyfriend named Michael Full, and Clara would continue to be friends with him into her college years. And they all kind of have this, I guess, dark mindset, kind of dark sense of humor, kind of similar interests, I guess, in kind of the darker sides of entertainment. And I can only assume, I don't know how dark necessarily that goes, but I know she liked to listen to Marilyn Manson.
Yep, that was a big thing.
So I think that tells you a lot about somebody who's like really into Marilyn Manson, and kind of what he represents. And
I always wanted to give Marilyn Manson the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was like, oh, he was misunderstood. And then all that stuff came out about him. And I was like, yeah, seems like a piece of garbage.
Yeah.
But I know, what other case we just recently had? He was also a big Marilyn Manson fan. Who was his name? Shit.
We'll get back to you on that.
Yeah.
Let me think about that for a minute. But Marilyn Manson makes his rounds amongst the killers, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure.
His music and message is pretty dark. But anyways, Michael struggled with depression, and he had attempted suicide several times. Reportedly, a psychologist noted that Michael was vulnerable to psychosis and even schizophrenia. Supposedly, rumors spread that Michael and Katie enjoyed having sex in front of their friends, which often turned people away from their friend group. Rightfully so.
Yeah.
You're either really into that and cool with that, or you're not. There's no...
I would assume most people are not cool with that.
Like, hey, let's go hang out. And they're like, oh, by the way... Or maybe they just like started
going
do you guys after it. Yeah. Do you guys mind if we just get busy right now while you guys sit here?
It's like, yes, I do mind, actually.
God. But the three of them, Clara, Katie, and Michael, stayed close throughout the years, and they often spent hours playing fantasy role-playing games, which at first glance, nothing wrong with that. We all love our fantasy role-playing games. Mine are video games. I've never been a big like tabletop or like this off-the-table LARPing kind of situation. I've never really done that before, but
I played D&D for years. We had a blast.
Honestly, very confident.
I had such good time with D&D.
If you had a good group, I feel like it would be good.
It really, that makes or breaks it, especially having a good DM too,
right?
Dungeon Master, or else the game can just suck.
I've heard a lot of horror stories about just like how people have spent so much time on this game, and then somebody's just like a bad egg in the group and ruins it for everybody, or cheats, or does some.
Yeah, if you get like a control freak as a dungeon master, those will never work out. But I had a blast, though, I will say, for personal experience.
That's awesome. Did you do any role-playing games?
No, the only tabletop games I really got into when I was younger was like Magic the Gathering and things like that. I never really got into D&D. I just don't think I really had like the friends that wanted to do it.
Did you role play as a sorcerer in Magic?
No, I did I guess you'd say a necromancer. I had a black deck. I don't remember exactly what it was.
Okay.
It's been like 8 years.
I don't know too much about Magic, but gotcha. I hear it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
My brother-in-law is into it, but
I just spent too much money on cards, so I had to stop.
There's the running joke. It's like the most powerful card in the game is your credit card.
Yep.
Yeah.
Why is that true for so many other games, though?
Yeah,
let's be
seriously.
honest. Man, you guys are D&D'ing it up, and I'm playing like Lord of the Rings Monopoly over here, thinking I'm like living large, crushing it, owning Middle Earth.
I still have my Lord of the Rings Monopoly.
Do you really?
Yes, and Risk. I have the Lord of the Rings Risk.
I love Risk.
Risk is that's I guess kind of a fantasy role-playing game to a little extent, maybe. Not quite the same. Not like
yeah. I guess
the same level.
You could role play in any game if you really try hard enough.
It's up to you. Right?
Yeah.
Shit, I can really role play in Sorry, man. You try to play Sorry with me. I am that pawn, baby. Trying to get to the end, or like
constantly getting kicked back.
Yeah. But anyways, back to the story here after that little sidetrack. But during her senior year of high school, Claire's siblings, Michelle and Jesse, had moved out of the house by then, and she was the only one living with her father. They lived in a stone farmhouse in rural Leesburg, Virginia, which, if you don't know where that's at, it's about 40 miles west of Washington, D.C. Some called the area the quote-unquote boonies. The house was fairly isolated and surrounded by trees on a 30-acre parcel of land, and to get to the house, you had to take a mile of dirt road. So that tells you this is, it's in the boonies for most of us. I mean, that's pretty typical country life for a lot of people, but 30 acres of land, I mean, that's no small size of property at all. That's quite a bit. So your neighbors are going to be pretty far away from you with that much land. In her diary, she mentioned her anger and hatred towards her father, especially during her senior year. And one entry read, "I feel the utmost hatred for him, and I hope he rots in hell, if it exists, and I hope he suffers and understands how psychotic his actions on earth have become." Whew. It's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Utmost hatred for him. So you're like, what did he do?
Yeah. And like as a teenager, I feel like we always have maybe not everybody, but there's some contention between teenagers and parents naturally, I feel like.
I feel like most teens go through a rebellious phase.
Absolutely.
I mean, did you?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
I definitely did. So I feel like that's just kind of part of it's this transition from being a child to an adult, where it's like the in-between time.
Yeah.
And you're getting more freedom, and you're kind of getting a taste of what it's like to be an adult. And your mind seems to think you're far more grown up than you actually are, and you've got everything figured out.
That's the worst. That's so stupid that we once thought that, right?
Especially now as an adult looking back, like, God, I didn't know shit.
No, I was dumb. And with that said, though, I never once felt utmost hatred towards my parents or hoping that they rot in hell. Like I never once thought that, even in my darkest rebellion phase,
That's pretty serious. I definitely went through phases of hating my parents for sure, for specific things, not necessarily as like human beings, right?
Right.
I hated them for actions that they did against me, but not as I never was like, they should rot in hell for eternity.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems extreme.
That's pretty
right?
extreme. That's like, or that they're dead or something like that.
Right.
Like I wish they would just die or anything like that. I don't think I ever said that. I don't know about you, but
I mean, I come from I kind of connect this case a little bit because my father passed away at a young age. So I kind of understand having that one parent household. So I kind of understand where her feelings of like anger are coming from, but the way it's coming across, it just screams angsty to me.
Yeah.
I know her actions later on go far beyond angsty, but right now she just seems like a very angsty teenager.
Yeah, agreed. I think what sticks out to me, especially, being raised Catholic and you reject Catholicism after a while, or I did. The edgiest thing is the hell, and in parentheses, if it exists. Like, I don't really believe or don't believe she's in this, like, I don't know. That screams edgy to me, because it's so unnecessary to have in there.
But in the fall of 2000, Clara left home and attended James Madison University, and her father urged her to go to college even though she didn't want to, which for a lot of kids who kind of go through this with their parents is going to cause problems in your relationship. He's a very smart scientist. Obviously, I think most parents want the best for their kids and want them to get an education, and it's not unheard of to be like, yeah, I want you to go to college. And I get if you don't want to go to college, it's not for everybody. And that causing problems with a parent that's like, thinks that the only right way to be successful in life or become an adult, get a job, is to go to college. I totally understand that.
Yeah, I was pretty lost when I was 18. I mean, my dad's an engineer, my mom's a ER doctor, and so obviously it was like college is the only route beyond this. They were kind of right for me in the long run. I think it was a good decision. I went to community college first before going to Grand Valley, and then I don't know. I don't regret that though, but I do agree college isn't for everybody, and it's okay if you don't go.
Before I found this app, I always struggled to find time to manage my personal finances. I mean, it's one of the most important things that you need to do, but for me, never was something I really wanted to do. If I had free time, the last thing I want to do is sit down and budget or look at my expenses or make Excel spreadsheets. But that all changed when I found Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that I absolutely love. I use every single day, and it helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, and it monitors your spending and even helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. With Rocket Money, I have full control over my subscriptions and a clear view of my expenses. Rocket Money is an app I truly love and use. I actually pay for a premium subscription to it because I love it that much. The free version is absolutely incredible to start with, but if you really want to take advantage of everything that Rocket Money offers, highly recommend the premium subscription. It is well worth it, and ultimately, this app will save you money in the long run. I don't know. There's not enough good things I can say about Rocket Money. I highly recommend it to everybody. At least give it a try. Try it out for free. See how you like it. I guarantee it'll save you money. It'll cancel those unwanted subscriptions, but it'll just help you move forward, being more, just give you so much more information about your financial picture. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's features. It's definitely saved me money. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/lightsout. That's rocketmoney.com/lightsout. Check it out today at rocketmoney.com/lightsout. So in college, 22-year-old Mark Pino, one of Clara's dorm managers, had witnessed her and her father interact. And at the beginning of Clara's sophomore year, Robert dropped her off and helped her unpack. Mark could immediately tell that the father-daughter duo had a relationship where they both were quote-unquote very different and clearly didn't get along. I mean, we've all witnessed that, right? We've always witnessed people out in public, or clearly a mom and a dad, or mom or son and a mother just not getting along.
People getting snappy with each other, especially when you're in public in front of people you don't know. You're like, oof, I can only imagine what's going on kind of behind the scenes here.
Absolutely. For her sophomore year, she lived in a dorm that was a converted motel behind a gas station with about 70 other students. And this was one of the most secluded places to live on campus. And Clara's window faced Interstate 81. The dorm manager, Mark, said that the dorm was isolating. It often drew in the outcasts and loners on campus. But Mark also said that Clara was, quote, one of the nicer residents in the building. One of the nicer residents.
Yeah.
Not the nicest, but
one of the nicer
trying to
ones.
give her a little bit of like kudos. Like, she wasn't totally terrible, but she could be nice. So in college, Clara studied computer science, which is a very tough major. Her peers thought she was intelligent, but she also had this quiet charisma, which drew people to her. But she often didn't get along with others, just like she didn't get along with her dad. In her diary, she would say she had a, quote, betrayal rate of 80%. She considered a betrayal to be any time someone just disagreed with her, which is, whew, that's a tough person to be friends with.
Yeah, it seems a bit controlling, right?
That's betrayal to you? Like just disagreeing?
Yeah. That's why I would not want Clara as my dungeon master.
I was going to say, I don't want to play any game with her.
Yeah.
That's hardcore, man.
Angsty.
Yeah.
That's the word.
Angst.
Clara Schwartz, angsty. Other students noticed she also had a very dark and morbid side to her. She considered herself alternative. She was into metal music and liked to dress in dark clothing. Her close friends did the same. She also loved reading about the occult, all that hidden knowledge, and she believed that satanic cults were, quote, the bright and honest future. Okay. According to her grandfather, Clara was drawn into a, quote, fringe group of young people during college, and they all enjoyed the idea of being outside of the mainstream, or as Clara would put it, we're social within the antisocial. They also bonded over their love of fantasy RPGs, dragons, vampires, and witchcraft. Honestly, kind of same. I love all those things. Vampires, not quite as big a fan of. I mean, I did watch the Twilight movies, so you can judge me for that, but those
we can all say that the Twilight, that is the best depiction of vampires.
Absolutely. That is all you need to know about vampires right there. Meanwhile, Clara began dating a man named Patrick House while in college. He once told the friend group that he had cast a spell that killed 13 people in self-defense. Is it a Vada Kedavra? Is it like some Hogwarts shit? Like, what is he doing the killing curse out there?
Isn't that crazy?
13 people?
13? Also, I'd be like, let me see the receipts. Where's the news report on this? Like, you're just going to meet
you got
a friend
away with
group
it?
and be like, I killed 13 people with a spell once.
Can I play?
Yeah.
Can I join you guys?
What a weird way to introduce yourself.
Yeah, that's truly bizarre. He also loved fantasy RPGs just like everyone else. And over the years, Clara invented her own game she called Underworld. And it was loosely based on Norse mythology with creatures of H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. She also used inspiration from Nietzsche and William S. Burroughs, which that's a very interesting combination.
Yeah. We've also seen Nietzsche come up constantly in these like darker, younger kind of satanic-esque, like a
vampirism, cult. Like, yeah, it's all kind of intertwined.
He always comes up.
Yeah, so I mean that tells you a lot as well. And sometimes the friend group couldn't play in person, so they played over instant messaging on their computers. Patrick would often take the role of Path, a rogue assassin. Clara always took the role of Lord Chaos, a pagan high priestess and the leader of the Underworld. Katie was Oriel, second in command to Lord Chaos, and it's also reported that the RPG crew sometimes stayed in character even when they weren't playing. Man, that's commitment.
I'm out. I love D&D. I would never be a part of this group.
Outside of the game, a bit much. Like, I'm all for role playing in games, but like when you log out or you step away, if you're going, you're going to go grab dinner that night at Chipotle and you're like, I am Lord Chaos.
Yeah. I mean, I did it up during our sessions. I would get into character. I would do voices and stuff, and I would really get into character. But yeah, once it was over, I was out. It's like getting into character, and getting out of character is kind of like you're acting, and that's part of the fun. But
well, imagine if all actors just like were always their characters in real life.
Yeah, it's the weird Daniel Day-Lewis of tabletop role-playing game here.
During one session with Patrick, she introduced a victim known as the OG, quote-unquote old guy or evil father. Sounds familiar. Clara ordered Patrick's assassin character to kill the man as part of the game. At first, Patrick thought that this was just a main quest in Underworld, but Clara tried to take their RPG chemistry into a real-life situation. Patrick eventually picked up on how Clara was trying to manipulate him, and according to Patrick, it soon became very clear that Clara actually wanted him to kill her father, who was in fact the OG. As time went on, she constantly complained that her father Robert had attempted to drown her and molest her. She used SMO as a code for sexually molest in her instant messages, and she also disguised the word murder with the word Tay. According to Patrick, she directly told him how she wanted her father to be dead, and she blatantly asked Patrick to kill him without even using the RPG code words they came up with, which is like, what?
Oh, yeah, good work. She's like trying to disguise this, and then all of a sudden she's like, no, I'll just tell him directly what I want.
I think that says a lot about her mental state too, and like how clear is she really thinking? Not very clear at all.
Yeah.
She later gave him a book about poisoning, and she told him that she wanted her father's death to, quote, look natural, so it couldn't be traced back to her, because poisoning definitely looks natural. What?
Yeah.
What's the logic there?
Yeah. As we've seen in our poisoning episodes, sometimes you can hide it for a little bit.
It's undetectable maybe for a while, but
yeah.
I don't think it ever looks natural. Like, who's naturally dying because of a poisoning?
Yeah, right.
What? She also mentioned she would inherit about $400,000 when her father died. Some of the money was supposedly left to her by her mother. And Clara was also concerned that Robert was in the process of cutting her out of the will because of her failing grades. So, establishing motive.
Yeah. And if we remember, so this is another parasite case, right? Not parasite. I know I clarified this in one of our other episodes. Parricide. It's when a child kills their parent. And as we mentioned a few episodes ago, female offenders are way more rare in parasite cases. And a big motivational factor, as we covered, is money. And so it's pretty apparent here, especially inheritance money, right? That's a big motivation for parasite offenders.
And we don't know how she figured out what her inheritance money would be exactly.
It was never clear. I could never find anything. She was putting in the ballpark of $400,000, but I never actually found if that was true or not. And I think maybe there were discussions that she had. I'm speculating here, but maybe there were discussions that she had after her mother had passed where money discussions came into play. And if she had left her some money, specifically for her children. So as far as we know, she had ballparked it at $400,000.
Which would make a lot of sense. I mean, her mother's dying, and I'm sure there was conversations had about her will and things like that. So it's very possible she got that number from accurate information.
Yeah. And I know her father's a very famous scientist. He lives in this, he has 30 acres with this really cool stone house and everything. So she could probably, even if she didn't know the exact number, she could probably put together something just based on his property.
True, or even just Google his net worth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can Google anybody's net worth.
Should I Google yours, John?
Google all of ours right now. I guarantee you they will all be wrong. It's not accurate.
They're always wrong. But Clara also mentioned this inheritance money to her other friends and said, hey guys, we could all move in together using this inheritance money, but only when her father was dead. Clara also told her friend Katie Inglis that her father had been violent with her in the past, and apparently Clara even said that Robert had tried to poison her at least 11 times. So here's where we're getting into what's real, what's not. But one night, Clara, Katie, and Patrick went out to eat at Ruby Tuesdays in September 2001. According to Patrick, during their meal, Clara sent her steak back 3 times, and she claimed it had been poisoned and her father or a paid assassin had somehow, quote, gotten in touch with the cook. So she's trying to kind of build this narrative that her father is somehow poisoning her steaks at Ruby Tuesdays.
I wonder what the wait staff thought of this.
Yeah. Oh my.
Yeah, can I get another steak because this has been poisoned?
This is poison.
I wonder if she was making up, like, oh, this is overcooked or something. And they're making her new steaks. And then when they walk away, she's like,
gone. Yeah,
guys, it's OG's trying to poison you.
Yeah. Which is ridiculous.
But I could see a scenario play out where she was telling the waitstaff, I am the Chaos Lord, and someone is trying to poison
so cringy.
In character at Ruby Tuesdays.
So cringy.
Which I don't think is known for good steak, first of all.
No. The steak might be poisoned, but I just
not because the father was poisoning it. Yeah.
It's been dry aging a little too long back there.
So later during that dinner, Clara asked Patrick when he planned on killing her father. She just said it outright, according to him. And he responded, quote, I need to see him once more. Clara kept pushing him to kill, quote, OG in their instant messages after this. She even talked about forging a suicide note for her father. But Patrick soon distanced himself from Clara, and they eventually broke up. So around the same time, Clara met 18-year-old Kyle Hulbert, at a Renaissance fair in Maryland through mutual friends of Katie and Michael. Supposedly this is a pretty big, if you live on kind of like the East Coast, I guess this is a pretty big Renaissance fair. But when they first met, Kyle was dressed in all black with a cape and a cat mask. And he was even introduced as an assassin. And the friend group immediately latched onto him.
Is this an RPG Renaissance Festival?
So
I guess some people do role play at Renaissance Festival.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Kyle loved LARPing. And if you don't know what LARPing is, it's live action role playing. I was just telling Josh, back at my college, we had a big LARPing crew that met like once a week in the summer. They got into this big field and just had this huge battle. And I mean, it was like, yeah, it's kind of nerdy, but also I think it was a big social event for people to get together and just be goofy.
Great way to meet chicks, man.
Yeah. Hey, actually,
go after
I don't know. Who knows?
No,
maybe.
You never know. Maybe your true love is there.
Yeah.
You might kill her in the battle or accidentally fall on top of her,
That'd be kind of cute. But if you're unfamiliar with LARPing, it's essentially improv, but you're playing games and you're also dressed up as characters that you're playing. And if you've been to a Renaissance fair, you might have actually seen someone getting really into character with like detailed costume. They might be doing a voice. It's safe to assume that they're possibly LARPing at the Renaissance fair. They often use real world environments to interact with each other, and sometimes it's organized by a game master who sets the rules. So think of it like it's basically an RPG that has come to life, and Kyle had a deep fascination with RPGs, wizardry, and medieval weaponry. At any given time, people say that he was always carrying knives and swords on him. So, Kyle, who is this guy? Kyle, unfortunately, he had a long history of mental illness, including paranoid schizophrenia, hyperactivity disorder, and bipolar disorder. He would experience visual and auditory hallucinations, and these hallucinations could be so vivid that he could inhabit cartoon-like fantasy worlds or memories that felt like they were real.
That's pretty serious.
Yeah, that's very
Visual
serious.
and auditory hallucinations.
Yep. So according to Kyle, he was actually first medicated at the age of 4, which is very
That
young.
is crazy.
His family often couldn't care for him, and he believed his mother struggled with substance abuse, and he barely knew his father. He did have a brother, but it's unclear what their relationship was like or if he still had a relationship with him after a while. But when he was a toddler, Kyle's mother dropped him off at his grandparents' house and basically just abandoned him there, which is awful. I think
that's going to have a severe impact on his development and his life as a whole.
I think abandoning a child is a terrible thing, and it just has, I don't know, limitless ramifications, abandoning a kid. And he later became a ward of the state at age 6, and he never saw his mother or father again. At the age of 7, he was first hospitalized because he made a threat to kill his bus driver, and he struggled in school severely. He once threw a desk at a teacher and also threatened to make, quote, a big hole at school, which school staff interpreted this as a bomb threat. Throughout his childhood, he moved in and out of several psychiatric institutions and later lived in foster homes for 2 years. Along this strange road that he lived, he struggled with sleep disturbance, concentration problems, and aggression for much of his childhood. And at the age of 18, he's legally an adult. He was released from state care, and he spent several weeks homeless. He was prescribed various medications through the years, and reportedly he continued to take them even after being released from state care because he still had a caseworker who was there who made sure he got his prescriptions. But he eventually stopped showing up for these appointments, and somewhere along the way, it's alleged that he self-medicated with alcohol and drugs, including LSD, psilocybin, marijuana. For some time, he moved in with his friend Sean, but he always struggled to find work. Obviously, if you have, all that mental illness and you're not taking your medication, it would be incredibly difficult to hold down a job.
Well, he really never had a fair shot from the beginning.
No.
There's no, it'd be such a difficult path to make it through all of that to the other side in a healthy spot, and especially with our systems and healthcare.
I think being abandoned, by the age of 6, essentially, And then on top of that, struggling from all this mental illness. He had a rough road. So he met Clara at the Renaissance Fair not long after he was released, and he quickly grew attached to her. At some point, Clara even told Kyle that she also had schizophrenia, and this was never, she was never diagnosed with this, so keep in mind that. But this confession made Kyle feel closer to her, kind of like she was family, which he'd never really had growing up, and he considered her a sister that he had to protect. He later said the only person he ever met who matched his own inflated ego was Clara. Their relationship was never romantic. Supposedly Kyle even had a girlfriend at the time that they met.
That's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
That he seems to be so interested in Clara. It almost, like, my first thought was like, he's got to be romantically interested in her, which maybe he was, and he just was keeping that to himself because he did have a girlfriend or whatever. But it is kind of wild that he does have a girlfriend while this is all going down.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think about it, someone who's kind of abandoned by their family, he just sounds like he really wants a sister. So I could buy it that he was never romantically interested in her. But yeah, so Clara and Kyle quickly became close friends. Kyle also became friends with Katie and Michael. As they got closer, Clara told Kyle that she had been abused by her father, and he had been poisoning her ever since her mother had died. She even showed him some of her journals where she had documented the events as kind of like proof almost. But Katie later recalled that Clara once said to her, quote, "Maybe Kyle can help me with my father." And supposedly Clara told her that the first weekend that she met Kyle. So she was already kind of planning what was about to happen here.
Diabolical, maybe?
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah.
She also said, now that her boyfriend kind of fell through, Patrick was like, "I'm not doing this, I'm out." She's quickly moving on to somebody else. Supposedly, she also said that she would be able to take a semester off if her father died while she was in college. Knowing that Kyle was also into fantasy RPGs in medieval times and stuff like that, Clara played the role of the damsel in distress, which you kind of know that trope, and she wanted to get his attention this way. She hoped that he would kind of be her knight in shining armor. Clara then assigned him the role of protecting Lord Chaos, which is her character in the game. He basically immediately took up the position of protecting her, and during their RPG sessions, Kyle would almost always play, he was obsessed with playing, a vampire assassin. Supposedly he even considered himself a vampire in the real world, and he allegedly drank human blood. But he only drank the blood of what he called, quote, clean girls who had been recently tested for bloodborne pathogens.
That's scary.
Yeah,
What?
Isn't that insane?
What?
Now,
girl?
this is all alleged, but supposedly, yeah, this is what he was into. Kyle supposedly took his vampirism pretty seriously. One time, a girl pricked her finger and approached him at a vampire-themed nightclub. And she kind of offered it to him, but Kyle rejected her, saying, quote, "Are you fucking kidding me? My animal nature is very important to me." And he saw sharing blood as like this spiritual and sexual connection, so he was basically upset that she wasn't offering him enough blood.
Why are you bringing me a prick finger? How about you just cut your whole finger off real quick?
Yeah,
and
let's
I'll
get
eat it,
real about it.
or I'll drink the blood.
Right.
Like, what?
Yeah.
That's
very
so weird.
strange.
Yeah.
After the Renaissance Fair weekend, Clara and Kyle began instant messaging, talking on the phone almost daily. So in one of their chat sessions, they were talking about Clara's father's alleged abuse, and as a threat, Kyle said that Robert was lucky he didn't know where he lived. And then Kyle asked Clara permission to kill her father. Clara told him to wait and said they would talk more about it in person. She said that if Kyle killed Robert, he would have to ensure that the murder couldn't be traced back to her. Clara then gave Kyle general directions to her father's farmhouse, and at the time, Robert was living alone. He never remarried, and all his kids were away at college, so he was just by himself out there. On Thanksgiving 2001, Clara invited Kyle to Thanksgiving dinner with her father. Kyle then showed up to the farmhouse where Robert, Clara, and her sister, Michelle, were getting dinner ready. Strangely, Kyle was really eager to show off this sword that he had. It was this 27-inch sword that he always carried with him. I hear it was, some sort of Japanese style short sword, something along those lines.
Where is he carrying that?
Yeah, is he
Like just hanging off his belt,
I
like
would
walking
assume,
around?
I mean, like,
Jesus.
if you think of like a Renaissance fair, people do carry, at
Just
least
have
the
their-
one in Michigan, they actually had real blades. You just had to zip tie the blade shut inside the sheath.
Oh, interesting.
Because you could also buy real swords there, but yeah, they didn't obviously want people like wielding their swords,
Sharp
walking
swords,
around. So maybe he had a full sheath to this thing and was just carrying it on his hip, like kind of a weirdo.
Damn, committed.
Yeah, showing up to Thanksgiving dinner with a sword. All right.
I'll cut the turkey.
yeah.
I brought the knife.
Allegedly, it's Clara had bought him the sword as a gift, and a friend had recently sharpened it for him, and he loved to show off like how sharp it was and everything. He took great pride in this sword, but Robert didn't seem to care at all, which is great. And if anything, he was kind of a bit worried that Kyle was so fascinated with this sword. He's like, who is this guy? Why? This is our...
It's not every day you meet somebody carrying a 27-inch sword. Let's be honest.
And is so obsessed with it too. So after dinner, Kyle got the feeling that Robert didn't like him at all. It's
Probably true
good guess.
assumption. Yeah.
Not long after the first visit, Clara told Kyle about a family vacation to the Virgin Islands that was coming up. She thought that her father was going to murder her there, and Kyle believed he had to stop Robert at all costs. But instead of going to the police, he figured, hey, I would just take care of this myself. Kyle apparently once witnessed Robert make Clara cry, but I could not figure out. It's unclear if this was actually just one of his vivid hallucinations. Because remember how I was talking about earlier, he would kind of hallucinate false memories. So it's unclear if this actually occurred or if this was just some weird manifestation, but he later wrote about it saying, quote, I could not bear the sight of that. Then the voices in his head supposedly told him that killing Robert would go against his desideratum, big word here, which is basically his like need or requirement.
Is that
that's
a Latin word?
I've never
heard of
no
that before.
idea, but that's
What on
supposedly that's his. He said that, but he was conflicted because he thought that protecting Clara was his true desideratum.
Okay. All right. Kyle.
All right. Kyle supposedly often heard these voices, and they were specific entities, and he had even named them. One was Saba, one was Nicodemus, and one was Ordog, and they were all in his head. So I did do some digging in like where he's maybe pulling this type of stuff from in mythology, but Ordog is a shape-shifting demonic creature from Hungarian mythology. He looks similar to a satyr with a human upper torso, goat legs, hooves, ram-like horns on his head, and a tail ending in a blade. He's sometimes depicted holding a pitchfork and having a large phallus. Good for him. He's a demon from the Underworld, and he spends his time stirring a large cauldron filled with souls who lived in sin. And when he comes to Earth, he hides in walls and makes high-pitched squeaking noises. He often makes bets with humans to see if he can corrupt them, and his goal is always to collect more souls to return to the Underworld. So as for Nicodemus is actually a character in the Bible and a leader of his local Jewish people at the time of Christ's crucifixion. He's really only mentioned a few times in the Bible, I think maybe 3, and he remains pretty ambiguous, but in the Gospel of John, he actually approaches Jesus in the night, claims he was a teacher sent by God, and during their conversation, actually one of the most famous biblical passages occurs with Nicodemus, John 3:16. I'm going to quote some Bible
That's
here
like
already.
the Bible verse.
This is it.
That even if you have never been a Christian before, you either know it or you've heard it. At least. Yeah.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. Yeah, there it is.
Love it. John 3:16, baby.
Amen. As for Saba, I'm not sure exactly who Kyle's referencing, but it might be a rich queen that's referenced in the Hebrew Bible, or all these demons, honestly, at the end of the day, all these voices in his head and things that he's named, they might just be things that Kyle kind of made up in his mind. But either way, these voices in his head gave Kyle permission to kill Robert Schultz as long as it was a, quote, just cause. From then on, saving Clara from Robert became his sole motivation. Kyle then asked Clara to send him some money for gas. He needed it so Michael could drive him to pick up some gloves to hide fingerprints, a do-rag, so he wouldn't leave hairs at the crime scene, and rags to clean up the blood. He would also ask Michael to drive him to the farmhouse, and on December 6, 2001, Clara wrote Kyle a check for $60. She sent it through overnight mail so he could buy the products that he needed, and this would be important in the investigation.
Yeah, not only do we have electronic records, but we now have a paper trail.
Exactly.
And payment being exchanged for a hit, essentially.
Yep.
So that takes us to the rainy evening of December 8th, 2001. Catherine and Michael drove Kyle over to Robert's property around 5:15 p.m. Again, they had to drive up that mile-long muddy trail up to the farmhouse. Kyle had just recently stopped taking his medication in November of that year, and before getting out of the car, Kyle hid his sword beneath his long overcoat. So Kyle goes up to the farmhouse, knocks on the door. 57-year-old Robert answers the door. He's surprised to see Kyle there, and that's when Kyle asked if Clara was home. Robert said no, as she was currently at her university. He then asked if Robert had her telephone number so he could give her a call. And Robert's like, doesn't know the number, I guess, off the top of his head to her dorm. So he's like, all right, I got to go get it. Come on inside. So Kyle follows him inside. Kyle then went to use the restroom for a moment, and afterwards he followed Robert into the kitchen where he decides, I'm going to confront him about all of this shit he's been doing to Clara. Meanwhile, his sword is still hidden beneath his coat. And that's when Kyle asked Robert how he was getting along with Clara. Robert got defensive and asked, "What business is that of yours?" And Kyle responded, explaining that he cared about her. He then accused Robert of abusing his daughter and planning to kill her on vacation, which I can only imagine what Robert must have been thinking in the moment. He was like, what
are you talking about?
What the hell, dude? And Kyle claimed that in that moment, he could see guilt in Robert's eyes. He took this one look as Robert's confession, and he later admitted that if Robert didn't give him that look, he would have let him live, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Just a look
confirms.
Look.
And as a person suffering from all these mental illnesses who has these very deep, vivid hallucinations, how do you even know that he gave you a look at all? That could have just been
a hallucination, literally. Yeah. Robert then smiled and backhanded Kyle across the face. Robert's hand cut Kyle's left eye, and this is what triggered Kyle's attack. Kyle then took his 27-inch blade out from under his coat and slashed Robert several times, bringing him to his knees. Robert tried to defend himself, but he couldn't. Kyle later wrote about the moment, saying, "Somewhere in the back of my mind, someone laughed at a fool who would grab an attacker's blade." As Robert tried to grab the blade, Kyle stabbed him until his grip loosened. Kyle then told Robert to back off and let me pass. He claimed that Robert only smiled at him and said nothing. Kyle kept stabbing and slashing the man, and as Robert fell to the floor, Kyle just kept on stabbing him in the back over and over again. Robert then looked up at Kyle and asked, "What did I ever do to you?"
This doesn't sound real to me.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest things that stands out is as he stabs Robert, he says back off and let me pass. And he then claims that Robert just smiles at him.
I don't think
what weird anime are we existing in here? This sounds like a totally made up story to me.
Agreed. And who's literally bleeding out from being stabbed by swords even going to be able to utter out words like, "What did I ever do to you?"
Right. Yeah.
No, it'd be you would just be screaming at this point. I mean,
that's why this sounds like some weird
a
movie that he wrote in his head about it that didn't actually happen.
Kyle ultimately delivered one final blow, which killed Robert. And Kyle later wrote, "When I returned to the state of mindfulness and sanity, I was drawing the sword from his back. One of the voices in his head told him to leave quickly because the victim's soul had already departed. He then rinsed off the blade with water, turned off most of the lights in the house, and went back outside to find Katie and Michael. Michael's car had gotten stuck in the mud, so they had to go over to a neighbor's house and call a tow truck. So he's obviously gone for some period of time. He comes back to the car, and they claim "Oh, we didn't know what was going on," or
Yeah, at first they were like, "Oh, we didn't know." They knew.
They knew.
Katie saw the bloody sword later. She'll admit. So this dude's coming back from a house with, a bunch of blood probably on him too, right? And a bloody sword. And they're like, "Let's go make sure there are witnesses to this crime." And so, yeah, they're like, "Hey, we're stuck in the mud. We need a tow truck.
Get a tow truck out here, because that's going to be great for getting away for sure." Later, Michael admitted that when his car got stuck in the mud, he took it as a sign that his life was over.
Might be right here.
Yeah.
On Monday, December 10th, 2001, Robert didn't show up for work, which was odd. He rarely ever missed a day, and if he did, he always called in beforehand. So his coworkers called one of his neighbors to go and check on him. The neighbor drove his four-wheeler up the muddy mile-long road up to the farmhouse, and they found one of the farmhouse doors open. And they also found Robert's body inside the home's kitchen, face down on the floor in a pool of blood. The neighbor immediately called 911. Investigators discovered he had died 2 days earlier on December 8th, and his body hadn't moved since. A toxicology report would later determine there were no drugs in his system. They found no fingerprints and no missing items at the scene, so they ruled out a robbery. There was also no sign of forced entry or signs of a struggle. Only one door was open, and the rest were locked. The forensic evidence showed that Robert had died due to multiple stab wounds, and the murderer had continued to stab Robert even after he was dead. He had been stabbed over 32 times with the 27-inch sword all across his body, including several wounds in the right palm, wrists, stomach, chest, back, and neck. About 25 of the stab wounds were to his back. And some of these stabbing motions, they were so hard that they went all the way through his body and were into the floor beneath him. They also found a suspicious X marking that had been carved into the back of Robert's neck. And this led an FBI profiler to believe they actually had a ritualistic murder on their hands. Meanwhile, investigators also discovered that Robert had been in some legal trouble and recently had to testify in court. So they first thought that the murder might have been connected to that case somehow, but investigators soon discovered a massive breadcrumb trail, which we can guess where that leads.
Yeah, because they go and interview the neighbors, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we saw these 3 teenagers.
Yeah, on the day of
the murder. 2 boys and a girl show up at the farmhouse on December 8th. And the neighbors had been approached by the teenagers so they could call a tow truck, which just made it incredibly easy for investigators to find out who the teenagers were, because the car that was towed was registered to none other than Michael Full. Within 3 days of finding Robert's body, police brought Katie and Michael in for questioning. Police later seized several knives, a sword that had been recently washed, and ritualistic documents from Katie and Michael's houses. And what did they find in those documents? Well, the documents suggested that the X carved into Robert's neck was supposed to be an occult symbol. Police also confiscated a computer from Kyle's home and 2 black cloaks. After looking into the instant messages on the computer, police suspected that the murder might have been part of some strange, deadly game that these teenagers were playing. When the police first interviewed Clara at James Madison University, she was calm. Her response to being told her father was dead was neutral and muted, unlike her other 2 siblings. She then gave them information about her friends Kyle Hulbert, who was 18, Michael Full, who was 21, and Katie Inglis, who was 19. And it didn't take long for police to get them to talk. Katie was the first to open up, and she told police she knew what the plan was all along. And she eventually gave police a 10-page written statement on everything she knew.
Let's wrap it up.
She's
that's the case right there.
Yep. She says she had been with her boyfriend Michael Full on December 8th, and the 2 of them gave Kyle a ride to Robert's house. When Kyle went inside the farmhouse, she and Michael got stuck in the mud, and the witnesses in the neighborhood spotted them. When Kyle returned from the farmhouse, Katie watched him store a bloody sword inside the car. At that moment, she was sure that Robert was dead. The 3 of them then formed an alibi, and they agreed they would tell anyone that had gone to the area to get something for Clara, but no one answered the door, so they left. 2 days later, when the body was discovered, they had gotten a call from Clara. She told them the police already knew their names and addresses. Then she told them she was going to stay with her grandparents for a while. Clara had also told Katie that the plan was for Kyle to kill her father, quote, because if anything came up, he would take the blame because he had mental issues. Which that says so much.
Yeah. It sounds like she had been planning this for
It's
a
like,
while. Right?
here's a guy I can manipulate
Yep.
and also use his mental illnesses against him.
Yep.
Katie became the only person the authorities considered cutting a deal with since she had the least involvement in the murder. Katie also agreed to testify against her friends and tell them everything she knew in a deal to get a reduced charge and sentence. Katie and Michael's story suggested that Kyle Hulbert was the one who killed Robert. Kyle ended up confessing soon after he was arrested, and in his 7-page handwritten confession, he said that he was solely responsible for the murder, but he suggested that he had become someone else entirely. He claimed Katie and Michael did not know about it beforehand, and he also admitted to calling Clara after murdering her father, saying, quote, he had done the job.
His attorneys did later suggest that his confession was unreliable, obviously because of his mental illness, and Kyle's father also agreed, insisting that Kyle still believed he was in some weird LARPing scenario. So, take that as you will, but like we were talking about earlier, some of that confession, and that's all we have, unfortunately, of what transpired in that house, but some of it sounds a bit fictionalized.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just hard to really know how much of it was really delusion and what was actually real to him and what wasn't.
Right.
But I think it seems very clear. I mean, he was 100% suffering from these severe mental illnesses. And it's very, very possible that this was all, he really did think he was like on some level of his game where he needed to do this
right
in order to advance or to accomplish the job, as they called it, and ultimately protect Clara. But he also claimed that Clara once handed him a piece of pork and said her father had poisoned it. He took a bite of it and spit it out, and he wrote in his confession, I could tell it had been tampered with, both by taste and by smell. Supposedly, Clara told him her father had cooked it separately from the other food. As it turned out, this event with the piece of pork might have been a hallucination that never really happened. But if it did happen, some theorize that Clara might have put something on the pork to make it taste bad so that she could convince Kyle that Robert was in fact trying to kill her. Besides the pork, Kyle also believed Robert laced Clara's lemons with sulfuric acid. In the end, he admitted he murdered Robert for Clara Jane, or CJ, and he called her, quote, my closest, most dear friend, and as a sister as well. He also wrote, I have always told Clara that I would protect her. I thought about killing him when the visions got out of control. I could no longer sleep without seeing him doing something to Clara. He then gave them very specific details of how he killed Robert inside the farmhouse, and at the end of his confession, he said he believed he had saved Clara, and also whatever happens to us, we will survive. He then signed the confession, Demon. Yeah, I think definitely was deep in this fantasy for sure.
Yeah. Not to say his confession is totally BS because, everything seems to directly connect him to the actual murder, but it just seems like details here and there are a bit strange in his confession.
Along with the confession, they found Robert's DNA on Kyle's trench coat, plus all of his coded instant messages talking about the murder with Clara had been recovered from his computer. So police are really kind of putting it all together.
Yeah.
It wasn't very hard either to figure out what happened here. In Katie's statement to police, she also implicated Clara in the death of her father. County investigator Greg Locke first interviewed Robert's daughter, Clara, on December 12th, 4 days after the murder, but it was difficult to find her again until December 20th after her father's funeral. She had most likely been staying with her grandparents. She spoke to police for several hours and admitted she had a rough relationship with her father. She said Robert had pressured her to be quote-unquote normal or more like her sister Michelle, and he didn't like the way she dressed and disagreed with how much time she spent in isolation. He was also frustrated that she had been struggling in school, and she claimed that sometimes he got physically and verbally abusive. When police asked about Kyle Hulbert, Clara said he wouldn't have killed anyone, saying that Kyle was only venting or kidding when they talked about killing Robert in their messages. But she later admitted that in her heart of hearts, she knew that Kyle would do it. Again, diabolical, knowing this is actually going to work because this guy actually believes in the mission here.
Yep. And also interesting that she would be like, yeah, he was physically and verbally abusive to me, but not once does she try to tell police he was poisoning me too. She leaves that out of the discussion completely, but she will be very quick to tell all of her friends that, hey, my dad's been poisoning me, but not to the police.
Right. If that was really happening, anybody with common sense would be like, yeah, somebody who actually has authority needs to know about this. But
Right.
no, let me go find this random guy with a sword on a 27-inch sword wandering the Renaissance Festival to divulge this to.
Yep.
It's just so obvious. Police ended up letting Clara go for the time being, and while they collected more evidence and statements from her friends, 20-year-old Clara became the last of her group of friends to be arrested for the murder of her father on February 1st, 2002. She was found in her dorm on the James Madison University campus. At the time, she was a sophomore, and when they went to arrest her, police also confiscated a computer from her room, which contained countless communications between Clara and her friends. Clara's grandfather initially defended her, saying that she had never come in contact with the suspects at all. Initially, she was held in Loudoun County Adult Detention Center, where she would wait until her trial. And on March 29, 2002, Clara was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit a felony, and 2 counts of solicitation to commit a felony. Before her trial could begin, county investigator Greg Locke struggled to recover from major back surgery, so the trial was delayed. Clara's defense tried to get her charges dismissed on, quote, speedy trial grounds, but the motion was dismissed. Meanwhile, Kyle Hulbert was charged with first-degree murder, and the Loudoun County Mental Health Center was ordered to perform a mental evaluation to determine Kyle's sanity. They were also ordered to provide him with treatment if necessary. Dr. Michael Deem, a clinical psychologist, performed the mental health evaluation. As for Michael Full, he faced first-degree murder, which could have ended in a life sentence, but he agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder. And as for Katie Inglis, she took a deal where she would testify against the others in their trials. In return, a first-degree murder charge would be dropped, but she still faced accessory charges. Clara's trial would be first, Kyle's would be second, Michael's third, and Katie's last. Clara was arraigned on February 5th, 2002 after 2 months of investigation, which 2 months of investigation to me doesn't seem like that long, because I think they were able to just find everything very easily.
Very quickly, yeah.
In pretrial hearings, Clara claimed her father sexually abused her, and many of the Schwartz family members rejected any suggestion that Robert ever abused his daughter. So again, we don't know for sure whether or not that's true, obviously, but the rest of the family members did reject it, and based on everything we know, could she be lying about that to try to, save herself? Absolutely, but it's also possible that there was some abuse going on there, just to be clear. Clara's sister admitted that the two of them had a rough relationship, especially when Clara was a senior in high school. But both Clara's siblings, Michelle and Jesse, said they never witnessed any abuse in the household. The family said that any disagreements in between them were just, the typical parent-teenager friction. But Clara's aunt Susan wrote a letter to the judge claiming that Robert's family had a history of abuse. And when she first found out about Robert's death, her first thought was that she hoped the offender wasn't one of his children, which is kind of interesting. Clara's uncle, Robert's brother, Christopher Schwartz, defended Clara, saying she was a good person but had some demons. And he said her hyperthyroid condition caused her to be confused and paranoid. It's kind of a weird statement coming from him.
Right.
But okay. Other family and friends said that Robert was a devoted father who often talked about his 3 children who were all in college, and he only wished them the best. So kind of an all-over-the-place assessment of things.
Pretty conflicting. I mean, I think most of the family in general defended Robert, but yeah, I think the most concerning thing to me was the Aunt Susan writing the letter where she was like, my mind immediately went to one of his children killing him, which is kind of a red flag.
It's like, what else do you know? It's just kind of weird.
The defense tried to paint Robert in a different light. 2 extended family members claimed that Robert didn't allow his children to get therapy after their mother's death because he wanted them to get through it together. Kind of weird, but okay. Investigators had also gone through Robert's computer at home, which had files containing child sex abuse materials. There were photographs of a young girl in, quote, various states of undress, and hundreds of images of preteen girls had been downloaded on the computer. This suggested, obviously, that Robert wasn't the perfect father that the prosecution had been trying to portray. His daughter Michelle, though, later testified that his computer was not password protected, and several people, including Clara, had access to the computer. So did she plant those files? It's kind of up for debate. Clara's trial began on October 7th, 2002. Her defense tried to pin most of the blame on Kyle, and they argued that Clara was just a troubled woman immersed in a fantasy world. In the words of her defense team, they said, quote, "The dark, almost silly dark world of Clara Schwartz collided with the sinister dark world of Kyle Hulbert. Clara never intended for any person to kill her father."
Okay.
Right. They also argued that she was a troubled child with a rough past, and she loved escaping into these fantasy RPGs. She often took on roles of characters in distress who needed protection, and this real-life relationship between her and Kyle was more just an extension of their role-playing. That's what they try to argue. The defense also painted Kyle as an antisocial person with unstable behaviors in the past, and they reminded the court that Kyle had a long history of mental illness. So
really playing into Clara's whole plan the whole time.
Really, honestly, yeah.
Like, they're like, oh, perfect.
Yeah.
We have the perfect guy to blame this on.
Yeah, we can blame the guy with mental illness, and that's what she was setting up. You're right. The defense then called Dr. Michael Deem to testify. Kyle's lawyers objected, explaining that Kyle's mental state was protected under attorney-client privilege, and Judge Thomas Horn sustained the objection. The defense then tried to call Kyle to testify, but he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. But his written confession was allowed to be used as evidence. The defense also argued that her homicide charge should, quote, be no more than a voluntary manslaughter charge.
Okay, reaching for the fences here,
right?
Man. Like,
God.
What about all those messages?
Yeah, we're just going to ignore all that now?
Where you're literally planning this whole thing and telling them what to do.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
The prosecutors had to prove that Clara shared the same criminal intent as Kyle. They also reminded the jury that, quote, an accessory before the fact is liable for the same punishment as the person who actually committed the crime. And that's important to remember. An accessory before the fact is someone who isn't present at the actual crime but commissioned the crime or in some ways planned, advised, or assisted. They also had to prove that Clara also understood the intent to commit the crime. Some of the evidence against her were, the cryptic emails, instant messages, and texts between her and her friends from June to December of 2001. She'd also kept their interactions in a file on her computer titled UW People, which stood for Underworld People. She also had several strange symbols in her notes, including triangles and inverted crosses. A note written on December 8th, which was the day of the murder, was decoded as a thank you note to 3 of her friends, which were Michael, Katie, and Kyle. The written statements by her friends were also used against her. It became very clear to the jury that Clara desperately tried to convince them all that Robert had been poisoning her and that her life would be better if her father was dead. So from all these messages, it was also clear that the murder was premeditated. The prosecution argued that Clara had used the disguise of an RPG game to manipulate Kyle into killing Robert. The prosecution said, quote, make no mistake, she called the shots. She was the overlord of the underworld. In Clara's defense, she claimed that she thought Kyle was just joking when he said he would murder Robert. But the jury was reminded that Clara had told police when they questioned her that, quote, she said in her heart of hearts, she knew Kyle would go through with it. All she hoped was that the murder wouldn't be traced back to her.
100%.
Yeah. That kind of
in my heart of hearts, couldn't be much more convincing than that.
Yeah. Other strong evidence against her included the $60 she sent so Kyle could buy the gloves, the do-rag, the cleaning rags, plus the gas money so Michael and Katie could drop him off at Robert's house. And supposedly, Kyle was also going to buy a phone card so his calls with Clara wouldn't be traced to his phone. Pretty suspicious. The prosecution then brought forward 21-year-old Patrick House, Clara's ex-boyfriend, and he explained how Clara had also asked him to kill her father through the disguise of a role-playing game. He said, quote, she no longer appeared to be inside the game. She appeared to be back in reality. The defense argued, look, Patrick's also delusional, just as Kyle's delusional. They both had somehow misinterpreted what she said in these messages. They even got Patrick to admit on the stand, this is pretty weird, but supposedly Patrick admitted he believed dragons were real and lived during the times of King Arthur. He admitted that if he believed something enough, it became real. He even claimed he had successfully cast a spell using salt, holy water, and a candle to protect himself from harmful magic. But look, even if someone has these nutty beliefs, that doesn't mean that he's delusional about Clara asking him to kill her father, right?
Right. And I don't really see how this is relevant to the case at all, other than just trying to make him out to be a fool
for the jury,
and just try to convince the jury like, oh, yeah, see, these guys are all out of their minds here. They don't know,
Exactly. The defense also brought in a psychologist to testify that Kyle had misinterpreted the conversations with Clara. They also tried to argue that it was impossible to enter into a legal conspiracy with someone who was possibly legally insane, and that Kyle was only taking orders from the voices in his head. But the prosecution had another witness up their sleeve, which, as we said before, is Clara's good friend, Katie. And she's really the nail in the coffin here. They used all the instant messages and text messages against Clara up until now, but Clara had tried to keep some of the more sensitive conversations in person. So Katie, when she testified, she filled in all the gaps. She explained that on multiple occasions, Clara wouldn't even use the RPG to disguise her thoughts about wanting her father dead, and sometimes she didn't even use language coded in RPG terms or characters. Katie also explained that Clara had intense anger toward her father because of his abuse, and her motivation was ultimately, as we said, the inheritance money, which was estimated somewhere around $400,000. Clara's siblings also confirmed that Robert was threatening to cut Clara off financially because of her failing grades.
And let's not forget the plan of what they're going to do after they get the money. After she gets the money, it's like, oh, we can all move. And
she incentivizes her friends to be like, we can all live together in
Underworld together in harmony.
Yeah.
In her Underworld house somewhere.
Yep.
Well, on October 15, 2002, after a week of testimony and 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Clara Schwartz, you're probably going to be so shocked, guilty on all accounts. The jury recommended 30 years for murder, 8 years for conspiracy, and 5 years for each of the solicitations, which totaled out to 48 years. Her siblings Jesse and Michelle said that no sentence would bring justice, no matter how severe. Michelle told the judge that she was haunted by nightmares of her father's last moments. She said, quote, "It's hard enough that it was my father, but on top of that, to have my sister committing such a horrible crime. That's a really tough situation to deal with,
honestly.
And just the thoughts going through your head, replaying his last moments, and full well knowing that your sister was the orchestrator of all of it is just terrible." Her brother Jesse said that he thought about his father's death and his sister's role in it every single day. When Clara was asked for a response, she said, quote, "Nothing that hasn't already been said."
Cold.
Very cold. Clara was later given the recommended 48-year sentence, and Judge Thomas Horn told Clara that she was responsible for her actions. Clara showed no emotion in or out of the courtroom that day. She also avoided looking at any of her relatives in the eye. She later appealed her sentence, claiming the court refused to grant her motion to dismiss the charges on the grounds that she was denied her right to a speedy trial. Again, nice try. Didn't work, though. She also claimed her due process and notice rights were violated. In April 2005, her sentence was upheld, and she's currently incarcerated in Fluvanna Correctional Center for Women near Troy, Virginia, and has a tentative release date of November 2nd, 2043. As for Michael Full, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and admitted to helping Kyle and Claire in the murder of Robert Schwartz. He faced a maximum sentence of 21 years and 4 months in prison. On the day of his arrest, he called his actions, quote, "a big oopsie."
Good Lord, man.
Yeah.
Are you
Oopsie.
serious? Man, imagine you're brought into police for a suspected murder, and you're like, it was a big oopsie. What? God, oh man. Total, just cringe, man.
Yeah. I don't think there's really a better word than just cringy and dumb.
Yeah. Stupid.
I mean, and they seem like they're so like smart and so like strategic, but yet
we're sophisticated.
No reality, no basis in the reality of what happens when you do this kind of thing, or how, like, not even looking into like how to get away with this in any smart sense, you know? It's like they're like, oh well, he'll go buy gloves and a mask, and that will cover everything for us. Meanwhile, they're there waiting in a car.
Right. And Kyle was caught on CCTV cameras at the store, like buying all the equipment that he used. It's like, they're stupid. Like, look how sophisticated we are. We read Nietzsche. We know philosophy. We're so smart. You guys are dumb.
She wrote a check. Like, what? You couldn't have just gotten $60 cash? You wrote a check thinking that they're not going to be able to figure out what the check was for.
Right.
When they find the receipt at the store that Kyle went to, and it adds up to $60 for all that. Like, come on.
I know. She thought she was being so sneaky, planting the seeds of all this. And man, so it's you know what? It's a major oopsie is what all this is. You guys, oh man.
Clearly things work very differently in Underworld. And however life is in like an Underworld, it definitely doesn't translate to reality at all.
Yep.
So, yeah. In a written statement, he admitted to driving Kyle to the house and felt ashamed in participating. Before he did, he told other friends he had been afraid of going because he thought Kyle might kill someone. So rather than notify someone who can stop this, no, we'll just go along with it and hope for the best, I guess. I don't know. In a written apology to the victim's family, he asked Robert Schwartz to give him, quote unquote, a sign that he was well. Okay? In the end, Michael felt like he betrayed his friend Kyle, and he felt worse about that than the actual murder. He was later sentenced to 18 years in prison. I mean, man, they doled out the punishment here. For this. It's pretty crazy.
Just driving him there. But I mean, he's an idiot. He even admitted like, hey, I suspected he might have killed someone and I still drove him anyway. Like,
proves accessory to murder right there. Pretty clear. And as for Kyle, he was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Many expected him to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. Kyle had an obvious history of mental illness and instability, but in the end, his defense realized that with his written confession and the clear evidence of premeditation and insanity defense would be near impossible to defend. His trial was scheduled for March 17, 2003, and he pleaded guilty a week before in order to avoid trial, and he said, quote, "I've always told Clara I would protect her. I could not kill him without just cause. If I was not defending myself or someone I loved, I could not kill." He also said that Clara had manipulated him into doing what he had done, and he regretted ever meeting her. His defense claimed that Clara was the puppet master, and Kyle was the puppet, which I think we can all kind of agree. Like, that's what happened there for sure.
That seemed to be the dynamic.
He said, "I allowed myself to be poisoned. Not a day goes by that I don't think about what I did." It seems like he definitely has like some remorse there for what he did. Howard Glick, a psychiatrist with the Loudoun County Mental Health Department, testified that Kyle created imaginary friends, including vampires and dragons, that became his family. Judge Thomas Horn recognized Kyle's rough life growing up in and out of foster homes and psychiatric facilities without a solid family, but he said the same thing that he did to Clara. You are responsible for your actions.
I think that's fair, right?
I think so, especially in this case. This is such a brutal, callous murder.
Yeah.
That I think as a judge, especially the families, like we need justice for our loved one. I think that's pretty fair considering all things and the evidence too.
True.
He also said, quote, "This is not a fantasy world for the Schwartz family. It's real. Every day they live with the death of Robert, a child, a father, and the fact that he left this world at your hands and at the hands of his own daughter. Kyle Hulbert was sentenced to life in prison without the chance for parole. Another concurrent 10 years were added for the conspiracy charge. And he's currently incarcerated at the River North Correctional Center in Independence, Virginia, and reportedly his balance of new medication has been successful in treating his mental illnesses." And, if you're watching, there's a picture of him smiling. I think, in the end, I'm glad he's being medicated, and hopefully that stays consistent, and he can at least get to a better place mentally.
Maybe this is a good place for him to be like, you have to take your medication here. You're not going back outside. We're just maybe that's best case scenario for everybody.
The last of the crew to be sentenced was Catherine Inglis. Claire and Michael did not implicate her in their statements at the advice of their attorneys. Since she testified against the others, Katie only received 1 year in prison for being an accessory after the fact. That's pretty wild, though. such a difference just because she
Yeah.
flipped on him.
She was able to testify, right?
1 year
Yeah.
versus 18.
Isn't that wild?
That's crazy.
And granted, maybe she knew a bit less than Michael did. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's your girlfriend. He probably told her what was going on to some degree, but yeah, it turns out, I mean, they'll definitely go easy on people who are willing to confess and testify. That's for sure.
So there is just a kind of a conspiracy. I mean, there's a grand conspiracy out there when it comes to scientists that some people have kind of played off of with this case. I don't necessarily think there's any connection whatsoever. I don't think there's really any evidence to suggest there's any connection with this conspiracy, but it might be interesting just to bring up.
Yeah.
If you want to explain it a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So some have theorized that Robert's death was actually connected to this bigger conspiracy at play. And around the time of Robert's death, people noticed that other scientists, especially biological researchers, had been targeted and possibly murdered around the exact same time. On Halloween of 2001, a Vietnamese immigrant named Kathy Nguyen was working as a hospital technician in Manhattan. She died of inhaling anthrax. Investigators could not find any trace of anthrax spores in her home, workplace, or anywhere she had visited in the previous week. Only a few weeks later, on November 12th, a 52-year-old biologist named Benito K. He was an expert in infection diseases and cellular biology at the Miami Medical School, and he was also found dead in the medical school parking lot. Police suspected he might have died of a stroke, but people thought he might have been jumped as well, but there were really no bruises on his body, so it was kind of mysterious. At about the same time, a Harvard microbiologist named Don C. Wiley mysteriously disappeared. He had been researching immune disorders, and his car was found abandoned near the Mississippi River. His body was found 300 miles downriver. His family insisted that he would never have committed suicide. One theory was that he had car problems, got out to check the car, and somehow fell off the bridge. I think the bridge was maybe up to waist high, maybe a little lower than waist high, so there's a chance that happened. He suffered fractures to his neck and spine, and his chest had been crushed. These injuries suggest that he might have hit a support beam before landing in the water, but who's to say someone didn't come by and push him or something. At the same time that Don went missing, a 64-year-old microbiologist, Vladimir Pasechnik, died of a stroke. He had once worked with biological weapons in the USSR, and he later defected in 1989. He told the British everything about his work. He was the first to reveal the Soviets' work with anthrax, the plague, tularemia, and smallpox. On December 14th of that same year, only a few days after Robert's death, a 44-year-old microbiologist named Set Van Duyen was found dead. He was discovered in an airlocked storage chamber in the Australian Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization's Animal Disease Facility. After an investigation, a string of equipment failures had allowed nitrogen to somehow build up in the room, which caused him to suffocate. So Robert Schwartz obviously was added to this list. I mean, there's only a few months span in the same year. So some people have kind of connected these dots of, hey, these microbiologists, obviously Robert was into DNA sequencing and biometrics and things like that. So that's the conspiracy theory. And obviously out of all of those, though, Robert's death was easily the most dramatic of them all. I don't necessarily
What do you
buy
think?
this.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I mean, I think it is maybe one massive coincidence that this is happening.
Which I was just interested. I was just looking up how many scientists are there worldwide.
Yeah.
And the first thing that pops up says number of scientists worldwide reaches 8.8 million. So this is over the past 10 years, it looks like. So maybe it was less than that back in 2001. But even then,
yeah,
there's
that's
if you look at the probability of out of those 8.8 million people, how many of them die?
Yeah.
There's only 12 months in the year. You know what I mean? It'd be one thing if it was all the scientists in one location died.
Right.
Within a few months.
Or if it was all the same way, if it was all anthrax or something like that, then it would be okay, yeah, something odd is going on here. Or it's just so perfectly planned that everything kind of just seems like an accident. I don't know, but I don't really buy it. What do you think?
Yeah, I've heard this before, and this whole like scientist conspiracy for, I mean, I think the kind of deeper level of the conspiracy is whenever scientists potentially get close to, discovering a
Figuring
cure
something
for
out,
something like the
yeah.
cure for cancer, or
Right.
like there's, big pharma comes along, or, big medicine comes along, and they're like, oh, we don't want you to discover that. Scientists don't need to be actually solving problems here because that eliminates
We
the
make
revenue and
money.
the profits. And
Right.
so there's that whole conspiracy thing, which
Mhm.
I think that one's interesting as a whole, because there's definitely a lot of evidence to suggest why big pharma wouldn't want diseases to be cured, and scientists really to be doing the work that they should be doing. However, I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think a lot of it's coincidence. A lot of it is just there's a lot of scientists out there.
Yeah.
And
I think like maybe if they were all kind of working on something together, or that it would make more sense to me. But I mean, they were working on different things. Robert Schwartz DNA sequencing, and a lot of these people were they were into, like the USSR guy was into biological weapons and let's see, infectious diseases. Someone was in cellular biology. So, I mean, it's like kind of connected, but not really. It doesn't seem like
not at all.
it seems more of a coincidence than actually something.
Well, how
at
does
play.
Robert Schwartz murder fit into the conspiracy at all? Is my question.
Exactly. And like
It's very clear what happened.
They proved the murder, and at no point, that would have to be a crazy conspiracy theory for like police to then be covering up Clara Schwartz messages.
Clara's
of like,
connected to some nefarious group that wants her dad
it's
dead.
like anti-scientists. Yeah.
She's an agent working to bring Hulbert into this. He's an
Right.
agent in this.
Yeah,
I'm like,
right. Yeah. There's no
there's
thread
no way
there.
they could handle this grand conspiracy on top of Underworld.
Right.
That's too much.
Yeah.
Maybe in Underworld there's a conspiracy, but
Yeah. What if Underworld is the anti-scientist conspiracy theory at the end
and
of
Clara
the day?
is
It's
the leader of it.
Yeah. There we
That's
go.
mind blowing. Shit.
Look into it.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think there's, especially for this case, I just don't see.
Yeah.
I think there's enough evidence to suggest what happened here.
I also think this conspiracy theory might do a disservice to the actual tragedy at play. Too,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We don't want to undermine that.
No. I mean, Danny, I'm curious, what's your thoughts? Do you think there's any connection here? Like, what's your thoughts on this case as a whole?
I don't think there's any connection to the conspiracy theory. I think it's completely separate and just a coincidence.
Okay,
Yeah.
Darth Vader. Over there. Jesus.
As far as the case goes, I mean, it's sad. I do feel bad for Kyle because he had a very rough upbringing and he never really he never got dealt a good hand, and he struggled at every point in his life. So I do think that maybe this is probably the best place for him, but I do wish him to have a good life for what's left of it, I guess, what he can have, at least a stable life. I wish him stability.
Yeah.
As far as Clara goes, I'm surprised she only got what she did. I think she deserves life. I think she's a very
Right.
manipulative, evil person.
Yeah.
I know I said earlier she was just being angsty. It's like she was, but this is beyond angst. This is evil. This is
Yeah.
evil.
Yeah. I
Evil
think,
genius, kind of, in a way.
Yeah.
Manipulation, a lot of these traits that we see amongst the most dangerous people in the world, and she's got them.
yeah, that control and the manipulation of, especially when it comes to mentally ill people. Like she was targeting Kyle specifically because of that. And it's sad because when they first met, he was so open with her. He was willing to be vulnerable, and she just honed in on that. She just immediately saw, oh, this is someone I can manipulate into doing something terrible for me, which is just so, yeah, that's evil right there.
Mm-hmm.
And she was even and clearly she was manipulating the whole damsel in distress, and she did that with Patrick as well.
Yeah.
And tried to use that to her advantage, and also putting herself in a position of power within Underworld and kind of using it as a disguise to hide behind and bring them into this fantasy world. But then I'm going to then flip it on you.
Yeah.
And like, oh, we need to extend this into the real world. Because actually, I believe Underworld and the real world are one and the same.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just this mastermind sort of way of thinking that I think she also got way ahead of herself and completely just lost track in an organization of what was going on, who knew what. There was none of that whatsoever. She just had it all in a folder on her computer. And it was ultimately just that rage within her, that thirst for her father to be out of her life, out of the way, so that she could gain access to the resources she felt she deserved, based on all the things she believed happened to her.
Yeah. Do you believe, I mean, I think that's kind of the crux of her story do you believe that she was abused by her father? I know that's tough to say because it's like there's no actual like solid evidence besides some family members suspected it.
But not her siblings.
Yeah, her siblings you would think would be the first ones to be like, yeah.
Right.
And I don't think that would have lost them the case or anything to be like, yeah, our father was abusive. I don't know. I think they lived with them for so long. And yes, there was a small time frame where they didn't live, where it was just Clara at the house with her father.
True. So there is a possibility.
Yeah, maybe something could have transpired then.
Yeah, and again, it does seem like Robert had some very questionable things going on personally, and we don't really know the real him and what was going on behind the scenes with him. Is there a possibility he was kind of this bad guy that, had some issues, and maybe he took advantage of the fact that it was just him and Clara alone? Very possible. However, it's interesting that none of that was proven, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or that there was not direct evidence in any way other than her. And I think maybe that defense would have worked better for her if she hadn't made up all this other stuff, especially the poisoning.
Now we think she's just a liar across the board.
Yeah, she really kind of hosed herself in that way of like just expanding the lies to fit the narrative, when there might have been enough, just, might have been more believable to the jury to just really go hard on the abuse part of it. But then adding in all these other things and all the manipulation of everybody else, I think just became kind of overwhelming for the jury. And the jury's like, how do we not find her guilty of this? You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm sure they had the same discussions, like, what if she was really abused? And again, should somebody die because of that?
Right.
That's a tough question. Obviously not. Nobody should be killed, but obviously somebody should be held responsible if that's going on. But this is not the way you go about doing it. And doing it in this way is so bizarre and weird.
And that's a good point. Like, not once did Clara go to police about this. Not once did Kyle go to the police about this, where, they thought it was like, if there was abuse, I know it's hard to prove at the end of the day. I know those cases can get tricky, but it is concerning that none of their avenues was like, I should contact the authorities about this. It was just, let's just go
at least try.
Yeah.
And I think that would help your case if that was notated somewhere that she did try to go get the authorities involved. They maybe investigated, didn't find anything, but it just kind of is like, it sets everything up for her whole narrative.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the scale, and like, it's, here's hers, here's her dad's, and, all of her lies just far outweigh maybe the reality of what's going on. And that didn't work in her favor. So yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I don't think we'll ever know, 100% what happened between Claire and her father, but did he deserve the death that he suffered? I don't think you can say yes by any means. I mean, that's a horrible way to die.
Awful.
And yeah, I mean, it's just all around a sad situation. But yeah, we want to know your thoughts on this one. Let us know in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube. But we're going to go and wrap up today's episode there. We appreciate you for joining us, and we'll be back next week with another one. And until then, lights out, everybody.